Spring of 1983. A faint exhaust haze hung over the wheat stubble of Barton County, Kansas, on the morning of April 14th, just past 6 o'clock. Dale Pruitt sat high on the iron seat of his 1947 Farmall M, a machine that 12 years earlier, the men at a Great Bend auction house had openly dismissed with a laugh. That morning, the M's engine was already cycling through its long, slow, idle cadence, warming cast-iron passages that had logged more hours than any other working tractor in the township. Behind it, shone a three-bottom mold board plow waited at the headland. The season was open. Dale had a list. The neighbors who had gathered along the fence line that morning weren't there by accident. Word had moved through Barton County the way it always did. Slowly at first, then all at once. Now, in 12 seasons, Dale Pruitt's tractor had logged custom plowing work on 47 separate farms across 3 townships in the county. By conservative estimates, the machine had turned over more than 11,000 acres of Kansas wheat ground since 1972. Yet men who had laughed when Dale hauled that rusted carcass home on a hay wagon were now calling him in February, asking to get their names on his spring schedule. The Farmall M that nobody wanted now ran the county's planting calendar. Yet what made the story unusual was not the total acreage. It was the price Dale had paid to acquire it. $50. Not from a dealer, not from a restorer, but from the concrete floor of an estate auction at the Barton County Fairgrounds in March 1971, when a 1947 Farmall M with a seized engine and a cracked exhaust manifold went to the lowest bidder in the room. The men standing nearby had laughed when Dale raised his hand. His youngest son, Gary, later recalled that one of them muttered something about good money following bad. Dale wrote the check without looking up. He already knew something they did not. If you want to see how a seized, rusted-out machine became the most relied-upon iron in a Kansas county, here's what I ask. See that subscribe button? It's our exchange. Your way of saying this story reached you. Hit subscribe if this resonated, drop a like if it moved you, and tell us in the comments whether you've ever bought a broken machine for almost nothing and made it into something worth keeping. It helps us bring more stories like this one to the people who care about them. Well, back to Dale Pruitt and his 1947 Farmall M and the 12-year journey from a cracked block to a county legend. But to understand how this happened, we have to go back. March 1971. Dale Pruitt was 34 years old. Of farming 640 acres of dryland wheat on the flat ground east of Great Bend, Kansas. He had inherited a working farm from his father, but had never accumulated the capital to modernize it. His main tractor, a 1954 Farmall Super M his father had purchased used, had thrown a rod bearing the previous November, and the repair estimate from the International Harvester dealer in Great Bend had come back at $840. That was more than Dale could justify that winter. He needed a tractor. He needed one cheaply. The Barton County Fairgrounds auction on March 13, 1971 drew the usual crowd. Estate liquidation, a mix of working equipment and iron that had clearly seen its last field season. Among the lots was a 1947 Farmall M, listed in the auction catalog as non-running as is. International Harvester had built 270,140 of these tractors between 1939 and 1954. They were a common sight across the Kansas flatlands, which meant that when one stopped running, as most operators simply moved on rather than dig into the cast iron block of a 247 cubic inch 4-cylinder engine that had already logged nearly 25 years in the field. Common machines were easy to walk away from. The tractor had belonged to Earl Timmons, a wheat farmer who had passed in the fall of 1970. His heirs had no interest in farming. The M had likely been idle since at least 1968. The fuel petcock was seized solid, the oil sump showed an inch of gray sludge visible through the fill cap, and the left exhaust manifold was cracked at the port flange. Barton County winters were hard on unprotected iron, and a cracked manifold on a tractor stored without proper antifreeze in the coolant jacket was a familiar casualty. Nobody bid. Nobody moved, until Dale Pruitt raised one hand and said $50 into the quiet of the auction yard. He hauled it home on a hay wagon. Chain-bound, the machine listing slightly to the left where the rear axle housing had settled with age. His neighbor, Ray Cantrell, watched from his driveway as Dale pulled through the gate. "What do you figure you've got there, Dale?" Cantrell called from across the fence. Dale climbed down from the truck. He walked a slow circle around the M and ran one hand along the cracked hood sheet metal. "A week's work," he answered. It was, in fact, 14 months of evenings and weekends before the engine turned under its own power for the first time. Some weeks, Dale did nothing but think about it. The first task was pulling the head, the International Harvester C248 engine, a 4-cylinder overhead valve design with a bore of 3.875 inches and a stroke of 5.25 inches, had seized on the second piston from the front. As a scored cylinder wall and a collapsed ringland told the story clearly. The engine had run critically low on oil, likely years before anyone noticed. Dale sourced a rebore kit from a machine shop supplier in Hutchinson, Kansas, and ordered a set of oversized pistons by mail. Yet the cracked exhaust manifold was brazed by a welder in Great Bend. The fuel tank was removed, boiled out, and resealed. He worked without hurry. The Farmall M's 5-speed sliding gear transmission had survived in reasonable shape, stiff in second and third gear, but no broken teeth, no scored selector rails. Dale drained the gear oil and found fine metal particles in suspension, but nothing that indicated catastrophic failure. He replaced the clutch disc and pressure plate, sourcing both from a salvage dealer in Wichita. He honed the brake drums by hand and rebuilt the 6-volt electrical system entirely. New points, new condenser, new battery cables, and a coil pulled from a parts tractor at a salvage yard near Lyons, Kansas. In November 1971, 8 months after the fairgrounds auction, the engine fired on the 4th pull of the starter. The sound was rough at first, a mechanical clatter that cleared as the fresh rings began to seat against the rebored cylinder walls. But by the time Dale had idled the M through half a tank of gasoline, the tapping had quieted, and the exhaust note settled into the long, unhurried pulse that Farmall M operators recognized on instinct. One cylinder firing every 1.6 seconds at low idle. A deep mechanical rhythm that transmitted through the cast iron seat mount and up through the boots of anyone sitting on it. Dale's wife Carol came out of the kitchen and stood in the yard without saying anything. Then she went back inside and started supper. The tractor ran all night. By spring of 1972, the M was in the field. Dale had fitted it with a used 3-bottom plow, 3 14-inch moldboard bottoms, exactly what the factory specification rated the M to pull, purchased from a retiring farmer near Ellenwood for $35. On his own 640 acres, the rebuilt engine delivered everything the original specification had promised. 33 horsepower at the drawbar. Consistent torque through the 5-speed gearbox. Sufficient traction from the 11.25-inch rear tires to handle the clay-heavy soil east of the Arkansas River without breaking traction. His neighbors watched from the road when they passed. Not one of them commented on the $50 auction price. Not then. Word traveled the way it always did in western Kansas. Through the grain co-op, through the elevator parking lot, through conversations held between rows at the seed dealer in Great Bend. Dale Pruitt had gotten an old M running, and it plowed clean. Clean was the operative word in Barton County wheat country. A machine that pulled consistently, without stalling, without throwing a clutch, without leaving a skip in the furrow was worth talking about. By the fall of 1972, his neighbor Bob Lowen had asked Dale to plow 80 acres on the north end of his section. Dale charged $6 an acre, the going custom rate that season, and finished the job in 2 days. The reputation built steadily through the mid-1970s. Yes, Dale kept meticulous records, a green ledger book that still exists in the family's possession, listing every farm, every acreage, and every dollar the M earned from 1972 onward. By 1975, the tractor was doing custom work on 12 separate farms across the county. By 1977, That number had grown to 21 farms, spanning 2 townships. Dale had overhauled the carburetor twice, replaced a water pump, re-poured the front axle bushings, and fitted a fresh set of lugged rear tires, routine maintenance for a machine pushing 30 years of age and logging nearly 400 field hours every season. Not one single breakdown had stranded him mid-field. The 1970s were a difficult decade for Barton County agriculture, but commodity prices swung sharply following the 1972 Soviet grain deal, which pushed Kansas winter wheat toward near-record prices and encouraged many farmers to expand their plowed acreage aggressively. When interest rates climbed toward 18% by the early 1980s, as machinery dealers saw their lots fill with tractors returned by men who could no longer service the debt. Dale Pruitt had no payment book, no lien, no dealer financing. His overhead was limited to fuel, filters, and a few dollars in parts. And the Farmall M had been paid for in full at auction for $50. By 1980, the M had earned a quality that working machines rarely achieve. It had become trusted. Not in the way collectors speak of old iron, but in the practical, a operational sense that Barton County farm operators relied on without discussion. When a field needed turning ahead of incoming rain, and a neighbor's newer tractor was down waiting for a dealer part, the call went to Dale. He was known to start the M before first light, to plow straight through until the light failed, and be back in the field the following morning without complaint. The engine, now running on its second set of oversized pistons after a second rebore in 1978, made no noise it hadn't always made. The spring of 1983 brought one of the driest field openings Barton County had seen in nearly a decade. Ground that should have been turned in late March was still frost-locked in places on April 1st, and when it finally thawed, it came fast, which meant a narrow planting window and maximum pressure on every operator in the county. Dale had 34 farms on his spring list, representing approximately 3,800 acres of committed custom work. He and the M ran a schedule his son Gary later described as 2 fields before breakfast, 2 more before dark. The engine consumed approximately 1.2 gallons of gasoline per hour at full drawbar load and never ran short of power. When the April window closed in 1983, Dale's ledger showed 4,100 acres turned in that single season, more than in any previous year. The running total the M had plowed since 1972 crossed 11,000 acres sometime in late March, a number Dale marked with a small pencil line inside the back cover of the ledger. Barton County encompasses approximately 570,880 total acres, the majority of which is classified as agricultural land. What the M had plowed in 11 seasons represented a measurable fraction of the county's annual tillage work, enough that old-timers in the townships had begun referring to Pruitt's tractor simply as the County M. It was not an official designation. It did not need to be. Dale Pruitt stepped back from custom plowing work in 1989, at age 52, after the hours accumulated on a spring steel seat over 18 field seasons had made long days genuinely impractical on his knees. The 1947 Farmall M was parked in the south bay of his machine shed, oiled, bob blocked under the front axle, covered with a canvas tarp. It had never been repainted. The original International Harvester red had faded to a streaked, rust-tinged orange across the hood and fenders over 4 decades. And Dale had always believed that painting it would have been a kind of pretension the machine did not deserve. His son Gary started it occasionally just to keep the rings seated. It always fired on the second pull. The 1947 Farmall M still sits in Barton County, Kansas. Yes, in the same machine shed where Dale parked it in 1989. Gary Pruitt has maintained it since his father passed in 2011 and says it will start any time you ask. $50 at a March auction. 14 months of evenings in a cold shed, 11 seasons of custom work across 47 farms, yet more than 11,000 acres of Kansas wheat ground turned by a machine every operator in the county had given up on. If this story moved you, please like and subscribe. Your support helps us preserve these machines and the histories behind them. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from. And whether you've ever seen a $50 tractor outlast everything around it.